Um, so welcome to the Inclusion in Digital webinar. Just so you know, the wee logo at the top there is a little bit funny. I have no idea why. I've tried to format it a couple of times. So this webinar will be going up on YouTube, so just so you're all aware. But if you want to ask any questions, we'll do a little question and answer right at the end of the webinar. And there's a lot to cover. So we will be chatting about the meaning and importance of inclusion, inclusive language, inclusive design, including design in digital products and services. So we'll touch a little bit on everything. Inclusion at events, so what you might want to consider. And lastly, how to embed inclusion from the outset. So what is the meaning of inclusion? So the Google definition is literally the action or state of including or of being included within a group or structure. But I have read another one, and this is from a woman called Sue Robbins, and she says, inclusion to me means finding love and belonging. It means taking the time to understand another person's perspective, to feel empathy, and to demonstrate compassion. And another quote is, inclusive design, so we're going to be talking about inclusive design later, it doesn't mean you're designing one thing for all people. You're designing a diversity of ways to participate so that everyone has a sense of belonging. So it's the idea that everyone should be able to use the same facilities, take part in the same activities, and enjoy the same experiences, including people who have a disability or other disadvantage. So regardless of our identity or background, we all deserve the opportunity to develop our skills and talents to our full potential, work in a safe, supportive and inclusive environment, be fairly rewarded and recognised for our work, and also have a meaningful voice on matters that affect us. So I'm going to just chat quickly through these, but some facts. So in the UK, 1 in 5 people have a disability, and that's approximately 13 million people. Only 1 in 3 disabilities is visible. So if you're only designing for people who are blind or maybe have a mobility impairment, you're missing out on 2/3 of the population who may have anxiety or who may have different ways of learning. Some other facts. So by 2050, over 50% of the UK population will be over 50. This is in keeping with the global trend of an aging population. As people get older, they might not necessarily be identified as disabled, but their needs are going to change over time. You know, things like fading eyesight or hearing, for example. And this is why it is especially important for us to start designing products, services, and build an environment that is more inclusive. So it might seem obvious, but some arguments might be more nuanced. So we need inclusive design, not only for those with disabilities, but for those who may be experiencing temporary hindrances. So for example, trying to click on something if you're on a moving subway or train, or those carrying heavy bags while you're trying to walk up the stairs. So inclusive design benefits everyone. Everyone has different needs and abilities, and these change throughout our lives. And sometimes throughout the day as well, depending on some of the activities we might be undertaking. So, inclusive language. And I'm going to chat a little bit about some of the ways you might want to approach writing and text as well. So, how to consider what to write. So, we're going to talk a little bit the use of language, but it's important just at the start to say that the things that I might suggest, not everyone will agree with some of these terms and phrases because language is fluid. But the first thing is to put people first. So it is essential to put the person first, to focus on the person, not their characteristics. So for example, instead of a blind woman or a woman salesperson, you might want to use a woman who is blind or a woman on our sales team. We're more than just our descriptors, so putting people first keeps the individual at the essential element. You might only want to mention characteristics like gender, sexual orientation, religion, racial group, or ability when relevant to the discussion. However, putting people first focuses only on the person and not their condition. So there's another argument that there's an identity first approach, which argues that honesty and less euphemism enables people to own or claim their disability or identity with pride and not distance themselves from it. So there's maybe two arguments to that. So another thing to consider is using universal phrases. So industry jargon and acronyms can exclude someone who may not have specialized knowledge of that particular subject. And this can impede effective communication as a result. So a lot of, acronyms, idioms don't translate well from country to country. So an example would be saying, hit it out of the park. So it could potentially turn your encouragement into a source of embarrassment if the person fails to grasp the expression of, for example, baseball's culture impact and significance. Instead, you could say, I believe in you, you can do it, So mental health, you need to recognize the impact of mental health. Hello, that someone else joined us? I'm just going to carry on, but drop us a message if you're having any issues. So for example, using the phrases bipolar, PTSD, OCD, and ADD, these are real mental health diagnoses that people possess. So using these terms to describe everyday behaviors, it can underplay the impact of someone's experiences with a mental health disorder. So it's really important to avoid derogatory terms in the context of mental health. Again, use gender neutral language. So we spoke about this in my team actually, but using guys. So, hey guys, can you get on the bus? Or hey guys, can you come here? So to address all people, that's gendered language. And this may insinuate that men are the preferred gender at your organization. So instead, try as much as possible, and I know this can be difficult sometimes, but to use inclusive words such as folks, people, you all, y'all, and teammates, and everyone. So growth mindset, individuals who believe their talents can be developed, so through hard work, good strategies, and input from others, they have a growth mindset. They tend to achieve more than others with a fixed mindset, so those who believe their talents might not be. So when entire companies or organizations embrace a growth mindset, people start feeling more empowered and committed to doing their tasks. So it's just another thing to consider. So again, when we're talking about inclusive language, sometimes it's a good idea to just ask if you're not sure, and what is used or what would be a personal style or preference, and how people might like to talk about themselves. So there's more information about sort of disability. So there's some basic guidelines taken from gov.uk, and I'll be sharing some sources at the very end of this webinar, but some basic language around writing about disability. So, for example, the word disabled is a description, not a group of people. So use disabled people, not the disabled as a collective term. So for example, we were talking a bit about this earlier about sort of identity, but many deaf people who might use their first language as BSL consider themselves part of the deaf community. They might describe themselves as deaf with a capital D to emphasize their deaf identity. But another thing to consider is avoiding medical labels. So this says little about people as individuals, and it tends to reinforce stereotypes of disabled people as patients or unwell. And another thing is, don't automatically refer to disabled people in all communications. Many people who need disability benefits or maybe services, they don't always identify with this term. So consider using this as people with a condition or impairment if that seems more appropriate. And again, I spoke about this, but Avoid phrases like suffers from, which suggests discomfort, constant pain, and a sense of hopelessness. Wheelchair users may not view themselves as confined to a wheelchair, so try thinking of it as a mobility aid instead. And there's other sort of ideas that can be taken from gov.uk and some other sources about inclusive language, which I'll share with you at the end. But now we're going to talk a little bit about making your platform more accessible. And this is understanding, ensuring people can read what you're writing through design. So there's a link there, but I'll share the link as well at the very end. So dyslexia, up to 10% of the population may have dyslexia, 4% of them with severe cases. And dyslexia is identified as a disability as defined in the Equality Act of 2010. So the word dyslexia comes from the Greek meaning difficulty of words. Many dyslexic people across the UK, whether adults or children, are unable to fulfill their potential. And this is because a large percentage of the population still do not understand what dyslexia is, the difficulties which it presents, and they do not know how to best support them. So obviously dyslexia, or maybe not obviously, it's not an obvious difficulty and it's hidden. And as a result, dyslexic people have to overcome numerous barriers to make a full contribution to society. And dyslexia can often co-occur with related conditions, such as dyspraxia, and I can't say this word, sorry, so dyscalculia, and attention deficit disorder. So some of the things that dyslexic people can possibly struggle with is understanding language, getting letters and numbers mixed up, spelling, speech problems, motor coordination, mental calculation, expressing knowledge in writing, concentration, and personal organization. However, it's important to know that each individual who has dyslexia is completely unique with how they learn and process information. No two people with dyslexia will have the exact same strengths and weaknesses. And obviously, we can't provide a solution that's going to help each and every individual, but I'm going to talk a little bit through some tips to consider for making sure maybe you're doing an online process, an online project, or you're doing a digital platform. So how to make the writing a little bit more inclusive. So font and size. You might want to use a sans serif font, such as Arial, Comic Sans, Verdana, or Sassoon. You can use a minimum of 12-point or 14-point font size. Use lowercase, avoid unnecessary use of capitals. So using all capitals can make it harder to read, and it can also appear that you are shouting at the reader. So it's good to avoid that. Color and paper. So if you are sending out flyers or posters or whatever else, where possible, try to use colored paper, even if it's like cream or off-white. And if possible, use matte paper to reduce glare. And again, where possible, don't use flimsy paper, which may allow text from the other side to show through. So good quality paper is effective. And ironically, I said avoid light text on a dark background, both on paper and digitally. But see, I've done it, and a lot of people wouldn't think that necessarily. So just to remind yourselves, maybe you can read that, but maybe someone else can't. Presentation. So keep sentences and paragraphs short and sweet. Try to break text into short, readable units. Use wide margins and headings. Use at least 1.5 line spaces between lines of text if possible. So space your text out. Use bold print to highlight. So italics and underline should be avoided because they can blur text. And highlight important text in a box or use color. Use bullet points and numbers rather than long passages of text. Don't put text left justified with a ragged right edge. So make sure it's kind of all in one chunk instead of all bitty, because it's easier to read. And don't use unnecessary hyphenation. So it's a lot to think about when you're writing and you're putting a blog up, or you're trying to give a little bit of information to make it as inclusive and accessible as possible. So writing style, keep text as simple and as concise as possible. So this can aid with navigation and understanding, comprehension. If you can, keep sentences short and to the point, so between 15 to 20 words per sentence. So imagine, a good way to think about when you're writing is just imagine you're talking to them. How would you talk to someone? Would you use jargon when you're talking to someone? Would you use all these sort of long vocabulary that might not be easily understood? So give clear instructions and avoid lengthy explanations. Use short words and terms where possible, and avoid, well, as I said, unnecessary complex vocabulary. So another good example of writing simply and concise, you can have a look at, there's a plain English guidelines, which can be found online. And at the end, I'm going to share with you a list of sources which might help with you being more inclusive in your writing style. So posters, leaflets, and graphics. So as much as it can be difficult when you want to be super creative, where possible, try to keep design as simple as possible. So avoid background graphics, which can make text harder to read. So at the side here, you can see some examples. It's almost just like really messy. And it makes text hard to read. So keep essential information grouped together, such as the time, date, and place of an event. Another thing to remember is everyone processes information in a different way. So while some people may prefer long, wordy explanations, others may need alternative presentation styles. So things that you might want to do, it could be including useful pictures, graphics, and videos. So this could include drawing out or filming how to do something. For example, when we're talking about PB, it could be, how do I do the voting? How do I register? So a video of how to do that, or a flow chart to help explain procedures. A list of do's and don'ts in bullet points can be more useful than long passages of text. And try to cut out any long vocabulary and jargon, or even putting in a glossary that can help explain abbreviations, acronyms, and jargon. So longer documents should have a contents guide at the beginning and an index at the end. And it's important to provide information in as much time as possible, because if participants aren't getting enough time to read and process your content, then they might not be able to actively participate because they've not had enough time to understand or read what you're trying to tell them. So if you can, just keep that in mind for when you're giving out information. So, inclusive design. This is my favorite quote. We need to make every single thing accessible to every single person with a disability, by Stevie Wonder. So what is inclusive design? Inclusive design is the design of an environment so that it can be accessed and used by as many people as possible, regardless of age, gender, and disability. An environment that is designed inclusively is not just relevant to buildings, it also applies to surrounding open spaces. It could be digital spaces, wherever people go about everyday activities. This could include shops, offices, hostels, leisure facilities, parks and streets. And again, digital, so online. And in the home. Inclusive design keeps the diversity and uniqueness of each individual in mind. And to do this, built environment professionals should, if possible, involve potential users at all stages of the design process. From the design brief, so what are you trying to change, and detailed design through to construction and completion. So where possible, it is important to involve disabled people in the design process. So some principles of inclusive design. So this is from the Commission of Architecture and the Built Environment, who published and promoted the principles of inclusive design. So the first point is inclusive. So sorry if you can't read that there, I think the text is jumbled up a wee bit. So inclusive, so everyone can use it safely, easily, and with dignity. Responsive, taking account of what people say they need and want. Flexible, so different people can use it in different ways. Convenient, so everyone can use it without too much effort or separation. Accommodating, so for all people, regardless of their age, gender, mobility, ethnicity, or circumstances. Welcoming, so with no disabling barriers that might exclude some people. And realistic, so offering more than one solution to help balance everyone's needs, and recognizing that maybe not one solution will work for everyone. So some of the benefits of inclusive design. So there are a number of benefits that can be achieved from designing inclusive environments, and these might have a positive impact on not just individuals, but businesses and society as a whole. So independent living. Inclusive design can ensure that disabled people are not forced out of their community and are encouraged to live an independent life. So the Scottish Government, for example, is committed to enabling independent living for disabled people by ensuring the right housing and support is in place. This includes the ability to adapt houses to make them suitable for those with reduced mobility and other needs. Housing adaptations and housing support services can reduce the risk of accidents at home and also reduce need for home care or long-term admission to a care home. Aging population, so we touched on this earlier, but the estimated population of Scotland will rise from 5.35 million to 5.70 million by 2039. So during this period, the population is going to age significantly, with the number of people aged 75 and over increasing by 85%. It's also estimated that the age of householders over 65 will increase by almost 54%. So with people living longer, this means that there is an increase in the number of disabled people in Scotland. So by designing environments to be inclusive, this can ensure that older generations can stay as active members of the community. And the last 2 points, so businesses. So as I kind of touched on, the government state that nearly 1 in 5 people in Scotland have a disability. So the purple pound is the combined spending power of disabled people in the UK, which is estimated at 249 billion each year. So it's therefore extremely beneficial for businesses in Scotland to adopt an inclusive approach to design. There's a little bit of motive there as well, as this increases the number of potential customers. And the last point is social inclusion. So the benefits are not just on businesses or independent living. It can lead to greater social inclusion in Scotland. And social inclusion enables disabled people to fully participate in society. An environment that is designed to be inclusive promotes equality and makes life easier and safer for everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some inclusive design in digital, and then we're going to chat a little bit about some products and services and sort of building design. So the first few things to think about is when you are distributing text and information online, you might want to think about a couple of these options. So audio options, voiceovers of each project proposal. So I'm talking about PB, participatory budgeting in this case, but this could be anything you're doing. It doesn't need to be PB. You might be doing a project, you might be sharing a blog online. So having audio options of the text that you're sharing is a good idea. So voiceovers, podcasts explaining what you're doing, or even getting the local radio involved. Video options, so how-to videos that explain how to upload an idea or use something in general, so how to actually use the platform. Braille, so are there options for blind people? Is there access to refreshable Braille display or speech synthesizers or screen readers? Digital flexibility, so can users change the font size or ask for help on your platform? Is there a chatbot to walk you through your platform or someone to email? How easy is it to ask for help? So you might want to consider some of these things. Another thing there is walk in the user's shoes. So for example, a new extension for Chrome called Funkify allows you to use the web and see different interfaces through the eyes of users with different abilities, such as dyslexia and weakened motor skills. So the other thing with inclusive digital design, so especially assistive technology, so text-to-speech software, so people who have difficulty reading just normal print online. And another thing to consider is, can you create a digital interface, or is there the option to have very high contrast so people can see with visual impairments? But again, it's important to consider that one option might only benefit one group of people, but it might defer another group of people. So for example, having high contrast, very high contrast on a digital interface, it might help people with visual impairments, but it might distract those on an autistic spectrum. So they might actually opt for softer backgrounds and lower contrast. So having adjustments and flexibility in your digital environment can be very beneficial when it's adaptive. So the Norway example. So in Norway, all websites designed after 2014, be it from the private or public sector, they need to, so this is by law, they need to adhere to almost all of the level A and AA criteria of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0. And I'm going to share with you some of these guidelines, but very few countries require private sector websites to follow these guidelines. But in the Norwegian state, they enforce this by undertaking random checks, effectively making it illegal to have an inaccessible website. So a law on accessibility, such as the one in Norway, has also changed the conversation around the topic. For example, clients can no longer refer to disabled people as being outside of their target groups, and developers or designers can no longer suggest solutions that aren't accessible. So moreover, accessibility and aesthetics are no longer seen as opposites. And excluding people from partaking of digital services not only means lessening their quality of life, but also more long-term costs in terms of logistics and human resources. So if you're making websites for people that have perfect hearing and vision and excel at puzzles, you know, you're not making websites for most people. So being able to navigate the site with a keyboard is great for someone who might have Parkinson's, but also great for someone with tendinitis, for example. And if you caption the videos, so that could be great news for the hearing impaired, but also great if you're on a train and you don't have your headphones with you. Good readability is great for the visually impaired, but also really good if you've forgotten your glasses, for example. And good semantic HTML is great for the screen reader, but also for CEO. And last but not least, adding alt text to photos is one of the core principles of web accessibility. So just as a wee extra there. So alt text textually describes non-textual content on a web page, thereby making it reader friendly for screen readers. And this is why alt text should be descriptive and not simply staffed with words. So just a wee overview, quick overview. Disabilities that affect access to the web. So this could include auditory, cognitive, neurological, physical, speech, and visual. So when you're creating a web design or any sort of digital platform, these are the things that you need to consider when trying to be inclusive as possible. So this is an example of inclusive design in products. So inclusive design is obviously not limited to digital interfaces, but it is applicable to a range of products and services in our everyday environments. So this is an example of a product, see on the left-hand top corner there. This is a product from OXO, so it's a good grip product range, and it was initially designed to help the founder's partner manage kitchen utensils because they had mild arthritis. And OXO's research into functionality and sort of meant that anyone and everyone with reduced sort of ability, so for example, if you've got full hands or wet hands, they could use these products a little bit more easily. So that's just one example. But, oh, hang on, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. So there are other examples such as, so if you have visual contrast between surfaces and features in a building, this can be important to enable people with visual difficulties, so to navigate safely around an environment and to identify features and potential obstacles. So visual contrast, there was an image down there, but I don't know if you can see it. I think when I've downloaded these slides, the sort of, the page has gone a little bit funny. But the image there was of a hall with sort of a visual contrast, so people could see easily down the hall better. So visual contrast is also beneficial for people who have cognitive or mental health or visual difficulties. So the use of contrasting floor finish can also be used to identify potential hazards, you know, a change in level or an obstacle, such as a column or barrier. So do you know when you're walking up somewhere, or there might be, you know, if you see a yellow marker on a step, you're more likely to see it because it's visual contrast. So in all non-domestic buildings and where appropriate in external environments, signage and information should be provided to enable people to understand the layout of a space or environment and to basically find their way around independently. Signage information should be usable and informative to everyone and include information, if possible, in visual, tactile, so braille, and audible formats. And it should be simple and easy for everybody to understand. So, to be honest, where accessible is not always equal. And we spoke about that even when you're designing digital. So it can be hard to accommodate for both. And that's why it's important to be adaptable as possible as well. But for example, ramps leading up to a building. While ramps may allow people with strollers, wheelchairs, walkers, or canes to enter, they may force people to use a separate path. So the strength and stamina it takes someone to push a manual wheelchair up an incline is disproportional to the effort it would take an able-bodied person to walk up a short set of stairs. So how then can we allow everyone access in the same way? Features such as no-step entries and automatic sliding doors are one of the easiest ways of solving this problem. Specific to products, this can take the form of buses with self-lowering ramps and new ways of securing riders in their chairs in a manner that allows them to board without assistance. And it's important to not think of accessibility as an add-on, but as an integral aspect of the design of the environment. It's equally important to design for the broadest range of abilities rather than specific target groups, which is what I was talking about. So equipping lifts for wheelchair access is useful, but this is not going to help those with sensory processing disorders. So bright coloured walls near staircases or lifts will make it easier for people with memory impairments or developmental disabilities to navigate. And this comes with the added bonus of creating possibly an aesthetically appealing space. So this is Namita's example, actually. She gave this one to me, but it's pretty good. So in London City Hall, for example, it's easy access by wheelchair users and anyone with a mobility problem, but for visually impaired people, so there's a lack of colour contrast between walls and floor, and the reflections might be confusing. And again, for hearing impaired, the number of hard surfaces would likely cause sort of reverberations, and that can be confusing as well. So there's lots of examples of this. So you might be accommodating to sort of one group, but possibly not another. So inclusion at events. So these are just some ideas for good practice, just to keep an eye out on. So it's a good idea if you would like to. So sending out targeted invitations to underrepresented groups. So this could reduce the likelihood of, the usual participants to attend these events and voice their opinions if you're wanting more of a broad range of voices, and more representation, which is always good. And to reduce the barriers to participation, it could be a good idea to provide translation services, childcare support, transportation options to participants that might require them. We need to ensure, so obviously, to truly enable people to come along, it might be that you provide a fee for their participation, provide free food, or it might even be that you have a creche facility or babysitting facility so that they can come along. So we basically need to be mindful of everyone's basic needs and ensure they have the ability to come if they would like. Another good idea is to have a BSL translator or transcriptor. So transcriptor could be a speech-to-text translator at every event that you run to encourage people from the deaf community and make it so that it's a given, it's not just an option. Also, having a breakout quiet room at every event, meeting or conference. So this could be used for breastfeeding, prayer, or time out, or just for people who might need some quiet time as well. So we also sometimes, these days, we don't have very good attention spans. So how can you make our events more interactive and engaging instead of, having speakers all the time and people not necessarily always listening? So it can be a good idea to take into account disability, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and try and make our events as diverse as the people who attend them. So making them more engaging and interactive. Another good idea is try as much as possible to do more work with marginalised and excluded groups. So it could be working with young people, young parents or working parents, disability groups, areas affected by poverty, offenders or ex-offenders, migrants and asylum seekers. And we need to treat each of these groups as valued and unique in order to include them in our events. So an example of using speech-to-text is in New Zealand. So as of 2018, to mark New Zealand Sign Language Week, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern provided sign language interpreter at every weekly press conference. So they do that permanently now. So a quote from her is, "We need to make sure that our actions as government are more accessible, transparent and available to more members of the community to see and hear." And this is one small move to ensure we're enhancing accessibility but also to celebrate an incredible week. And the use of this sign language interpreter was especially appreciated. So after the horrific march, so in the 15 terrorist attacks in Christchurch. And they noticed that by doing this, including the deaf and hard of hearing community in this message, was truly a sort of a sign of united in grief. And one Twitter user wrote that while watching a sign language interpreter during New Zealand's response to the Christchurch attack, so quote, "One has to acknowledge this deep sensitivity of the New Zealand society." So that's just a wee example there of how it can be a positive thing. So embedding conclusion, and this is the last point we'll talk about before we get into questions. So embedding conclusion. So some ideas of doing this for good practice. You might want to ensure leaders of organizations or companies or your community, they understand that inclusion is about ensuring that everyone's voice is heard, opinions are considered, and value to the team is obviously really important. You might want to train managers and staff in sort of inclusion training, so and holding them accountable to show that inclusivity is a core competency of your organization. So you might want to form an inclusion council. So this could be a group of people and that actually has genuine influence and power. Another idea is having an environment where people can feel comfortable, so bringing their full selves to work. So value differences and build on this environment. You might want to sort of identify underrepresented groups' needs and make sure you're giving them the necessary support and resources that they require. You need to, and a good idea to do is reevaluate your organization. So keep reevaluating, have sort of, I don't know, monthly or every 3 months check, how can we make this better? How can we make our organization or our way of working more inclusive? And again, so daily interactions are basically the most telling sign of whether your company or your organization has an inclusive culture. And that is it. So here is some sources, and these slides will be made available on the Knowledge Hub website, but also up on the YouTube channel, so our DEMSOC YouTube channel. I think we've got 2 more webinars coming up, and the dates and times will be made available again on Knowledge Hub. And here is our email address. So if you have any questions, feel free to comment on our YouTube channel, but we're going to stop recording now so that I can have a chat with people on the webinar. Thank you very much for joining, and talk to you soon. Okay.